Part 47. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 467. In the 5th year of the reign of Prime Minister Liu Buwei, he issued an edict to serve as Prime Minister and Gongguan. What does this mean? Fatty knew what these words were from the sounds coming out of Sudbai's mouth. This is not to blame Fatty. In other aspects, Fatty is definitely a human being, but in terms of history, he can really only be regarded as Huanzhuge level. The Qin dynasty has governed the country with legalist thinking since Shangyang's reform. Legalist thinking has been integrated into all aspects of the country. Even every weapon is strictly controlled when it is manufactured. Once the quality of this weapon appears, for the mistakes, none of the responsible persons recorded on it can escape. The 5 years in the inscription should refer to the 5th year of the Qin dynasty, that is, 242 BC. Xiangbang is the Xiongguo in the classics. In the Han dynasty, it was renamed Xiangbang as Xiongguo to avoid the taboo of Liu Bang, the founder of the Han dynasty. The word in the inscription is the name of the place. Chengji and Gongyin are the supervising officials and craftsmen. Sudbai explained to the fat man in a low voice, while the two of them kept marching with the large army in front. Fortunately, no one paid attention to this soft whisper, because many people were whispering to each other. Klaus and the man surnamed Joe walked together, the woman in the down jacket walked with the old man, Sudbai walked with the fat man, and the man in the t-shirt was alone. Everyone was communicating in low voices one by one. There will be GE from the Qin dynasty here, does it mean that the Qin army was here at that time? The fat man was a little surprised and said that since the last time he experienced the conclusion that Sudbai and Gyatso sat together to discuss, he had also used his mobile phone to cram in some Qin dynasty history, but it was not so systematic and not so detailed. I don't know. According to historical records, the chronicles of the first emperor of Qin, the land extends from the sea to Korea in the east, Lintao and Cheongzhong in the west, Xionghu in the south, the river in the north as a barrier, and the Yinshan Mountains to Liaodong. The Cheonghir is an ancient place name. In the Qin and Han dynasties, it refers to the area where the Qiang people lived, namely today's Qinghai, Tibet, northwest Sichuan, and southwest Gansu. But where we are now is considered to be the deepest part of Tibet, and it is actually not too far away from the border. The Qin dynasty did not really implement rule over Tibet. At that time, Tibet should still be the life of various small tribes in the primitive period. Model, I remember that it was not until the establishment of Tubo that Tibet truly had its own representative political power. The most famous one is the story of Songtsen Gampo, the leader of Tubo, and Princess Wencheng. But that was during the Tang dynasty of China, not far from Qin Shi Huang. The time difference should be about 800 years. Tibet is so big, why didn't the first emperor conquer it? I checked the map of the Qin dynasty a few days ago. Tibet is such a huge area. Taking it down would almost double the territory of the Qin dynasty. Sudbai rolled his eyes at the fat man. What can we do if we take it down? Can it be cultivated? The land is vast and sparsely populated, the climate is not good, and it is a plateau. How much power of the Central Plains dynasty will be consumed to conquer it, and what can be obtained from it? Taking it was a loss-making business, so it was not until the rise of the Mongols that they completely conquered Tibet and integrated it into their own territory because of their own special political system and national character. The Central Plains dynasty, that is, it was not until the Qianlong period that there was a minister in Tibet. The original intention was to have equal law enforcement power in Tibet and the Tibetan government, but it was more of a formal rule. The real integration of Tibet into the Chinese territory was because it committed suicide. The rebellion gave the People's Liberation Army a reason and excuse to enter Tibet to quell the rebellion. Then this means that a Qin army came to the plateau to travel. The fat man was a little dizzy. It was just riding horses and running to get here. It was really leisurely. Let's walk inside first and then take a look. I estimate that since Qin Chao's GE was found on the outside, there should be other discoveries inside. Ahead, on the inside of the cracked rock wall, there is a sunken space. Because it has penetrated very deep into the ground, and this is a crack exposed by the earthquake, the original ecology below is well preserved. Inside, you can see crystals flashing and ice layers, just like a square-sized refrigerator open to you. The eerie chill forced everyone outside, even the audience, to shrink their necks subconsciously. It's definitely not because of the climate if it's so cold. It's not that simple. The older audience member stood up and spoke at this time. At the same time, he stared at Klaus coldly. "Mr. Claus, we are all here. Before we go in, you should at least tell us what will be inside. We all know and understand the principle that people die for wealth and birds die for food. There will definitely be something inside. There's danger, but if you're not even willing to tell us what's inside, then we'd rather stop here." The rest of the audience also looked at Klaus. Obviously, this is the best time to collectively demand the right to know. Everyone is willing to take advantage of the fire, but no one wants to die in danger when they are unprepared. Inside, there is a snake, a spiritual snake born from the integration of evil energy. This snake itself is not very strong, but here it occupies the right time, place, and people, so it is very troublesome, even for experienced listeners. If you are not careful, you will be left here forever. To be honest, I went in once and almost didn't come out, Klaus explained with a smile that poisoned everyone. Then you'd better be the first one, the old man said to the audience. Of course, Klaus bowed slightly and took the initiative to walk in. The others slowly followed him. "Hey, Dabai," that nigger suddenly became so talkative and polite, "I'm a little uncomfortable with it," the fat man muttered. "We should pay more attention to ourselves. By the way, have the formations you left behind sensed those llamas?" Subai asked. "No, not at all," Fatty said with certainty. "This is strange. If those llamas didn't sneak up from behind, could it be that they are waiting for us inside?" At this point, Subai suddenly had an idea in his mind, as if he had captured something. The fat man was also reminded by Subai's words, and a look of horror appeared on his face. "It is really possible. They must have explored this place before. Even if they have not entered the deepest part, they are familiar with the environment here. Before they should have planned to summon some listeners to explore the deepest secrets, but now they may have settled for the second best, tricking the listeners they summoned here in order to obtain a quick way to recover from these listeners. These llamas are the best at duplicity. The last time Yin Gyatso and we also used this kind of compromise method, which was most likely to minimize possible punishment from the broadcast. Dabai, should we really continue walking in? This is not about catching tiger cubs if we don't enter the tiger's den, but we are heading towards Tiger Mountain knowing that there are tigers in the mountain. Let's walk a little further in, take a few more looks, and then we'll exit." Subai breathed a long sigh of relief and obviously had a deep psychological struggle. In fact, the Qin dynasty's GE was discovered outside. Subai really wanted to see if there would be anything from the Qin dynasty inside. This was not the case. Because Subai is obsessed with archaeological research. In fact, Subai doesn't have that hobby. But now, according to the theory that he and the monk have explored, the history of the earth was cut off before and after the death of Qin Shi Huang. Now in the east, things about Qin Shi Huang are in the west. The matter about Alexander the Great no longer represents simple and pure history, but a worldview. The further you go, the lower the temperature becomes. Even the audience feels uncomfortable with this low temperature. Moreover, a personal image appears in the surrounding ice and crystals. These people were all prostrate on the ground, as if begging for mercy or kneeling down, with pious and fearful expressions on their faces. The old listeners specifically investigated and confirmed, they are real people, not figurines, but it is obvious that they have died long ago, and judging from their attire, They should be the ancestors of Tibet. The Tibetan ancestors here and the local people in Tibet today are probably not the same ancestors at all, because the collapse of every dynasty and the ups and downs of the political situation often represent the demise of a nation. As a historian once said, if we really want to talk about things according to the narrow ethnic theory, the real pure Chinese people, the real descendants of Yan and Huang, were just a small tribe on the edge of the Yellow River. Even in the spring and autumn period and the Warring States period, now at that time, Jiangsu, Zhejiang, and Guangdong, which had the best economic development in China, were still the territories of barbarians. Even the small Korean peninsula has seen several upgradings of local indigenous people, let alone other places. Clang. The man surnamed Joe stepped on something and made a crisp sound. He bent down and picked up something on the ground. It was a bronze sword. After picking up the bronze sword, the man surnamed Joe's breathing suddenly became much heavier. At that time, other people were also observing the surrounding environment, and everyone made discoveries, so everyone was minding their own business and didn't care what others were doing. The man surnamed Joe walked up to the fat man with a bronze sword. "Wan, what are you doing?" the fat man asked angrily. In the fat man's eyes, since the man named Joe was so close to the black man, he must be with those llamas. "People from the Jiang country, look at the lines on this." The man surnamed Joe lightly sketched the bronze sword with his fingers. "Does this look like the direction of the formation lines in the pre-Qin period?" The fat man's expression suddenly changed, and he immediately picked it up and looked at it. Subai walked diagonally by himself and climbed over the ice sculptures and crystals in front of him. Then, the sunken space in front appeared in Subai's field of vision to the maximum extent. "It is as expected." Subai pursed his lips. Looking at this scene, his heart was filled with shock. At the same time, a smile appeared on the corner of Subai's mouth. Monk, it's a pity that you are still carrying out photosynthesis. You can't see the scene here for yourself. You will definitely regret it." Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 468. Below is a row of military formations. This is the military formation of the Qin army. There are not many people. It is even smaller than pit number 1 in the Terracotta Warriors and Horses History Museum in Lintung. There are only 200 people in total, and the surroundings are the corpses of Tibetan ancestors wrapped in crystal were densely packed in ice. Originally, Subai thought that these Tibetan ancestors were kneeling down to worship the Qin army. It might be a partial army of the first emperor who marched all the way to the plateau, shocking many tribes in Tibet and making them worship. But now it seems that it's not like this at all. What I thought before was really too simple. The ancestors of Tibet are not worshipping the Qin army. An old voice sounded from beside Subai. Subai then realized that it was the old listener. The old listener was wearing grey old-fashioned clothes, which he had not worn before. Glasses, but at this moment he took out a pair of reading glasses from his clothes and put them on. He seemed to have noticed Subai's gaze on him, turned his head and looked at Subai, and smiled perfunctorily. "My little friend, what was written on the bronze gun before?" Obviously, the old man noticed the detail of the fat man picking up the bronze gun from the gravel, but he did not say anything about it, but waited for this opportunity to ask Subai alone. After all, a secret is only a secret if it is in the hands of a few. Subai had no intention of hiding it. The monk was not around at this time. If this old man was really the kind of person who studied history very well, the advantages would definitely outweigh the disadvantages for Subai now. However, it seemed that the old man did not know about the first emperor. Regarding the matter with Alexander the Great, I don't know about the historical gap. After all, not everyone has the opportunity to see the memory picture of an ancient vampire. In fact, Subai and the four have already agreed on this matter, and they must not do it. Leak it to a fifth person. In the 5th year of the reign of Prime Minister Lu Buwei, he issued an imperial edict to serve as prime minister, and Gongyan Subai read out the words on the bronze ge. "Oh, something from the time of the first emperor." The old man nodded, and then said doubtfully, "If just a bronze weapon is left here, it can still be understood as a lost weapon of the Qin dynasty, even if it is exiled to India, or even it is not surprising in Europe. After all, even in the Han dynasty, although bronze weapons were gradually replaced by iron weapons, they still occupied a certain proportion. Bronze weapons were more valuable to other regional regimes at that time, such as the Huns and Buyeo. The stone tools of today are so much more advanced that even if a tribe in Tibet obtained a few bronze products, they would still be regarded as treasures, and it would be normal to put them in mausoleums or places of worship. However, there is another Qin dynasty army here, which makes no sense. The bronze sword obviously did not come here wandering around, but was brought here by this Qin dynasty army. This place is no longer a pure place of worship for Tibetan ancestors, but a place." When he said this, the old man glanced at Subai meaningfully. "It's an ancient battlefield." "Go down and have a look," Subai suggested. "Aren't you afraid that those old lamas are hiding somewhere nearby to prepare people? This place must have its evil nature. The spiritual snake that the black man mentioned earlier may be just one of them. There should be other dangers. Even for this Qin dynasty army, it is worth taking a risk." "My little friend, you also studied history before." "Just kidding, I majored in civil engineering. I am a professor of the history department of Shenzhen University. This is my business card." The old man handed Subai a business card. "If both of us can leave here alive, we can communicate with each other if we have the opportunity in the future." Subai took the business card and suddenly felt that the scene was very inconsistent. They were the audience, but they ended up exchanging archaeological issues here. The rest of the people also came here, and Klaus also stood on it, looking at the man named Zhou next to him. "This is a woman from your Chinese Qin dynasty, right?" The man surnamed Zhou nodded. "It is the army of the Qin dynasty. The military uniforms and equipment of the armies of each period in China are very different." Oh, Klaus was not very surprised, but waved his hand. "Let's go on, there will be something that will surprise you below." This sentence means that there will be good things down there, but the old audience took a deep breath at this moment and looked at Subai with questioning eyes. Obviously, down here, they are probably their burial ground. The danger should be right ahead. At this time, the fat man also came to Subai's side and lightly bumped Subai's shoulder. "Dabai, you can relax now." Subai grabbed a piece of crystal in front of him with one hand. To be honest, he was really unwilling to leave like this. Qin dynasty's army was frozen in front of them one by one. There were obviously many things below. He really missed it? Go ahead and take a look, and you might be able to discover the secrets of history being cut off, or even more information about broadcasting. The old man took out a bell from his arms and looked at Subai seriously. "This is the soul reviving bell. It should be useful in the place in front. My friend, as long as you can ensure my safety after going down, I can use this soul bell to disrupt the danger they designed." Obviously, the old man did not want to give up and left. The fat man pursed his lips and said, "Dabai, it's up to you, but I still think it's safest to turn around and leave. We're all here, let's go in and take a look again." If there are really any changes, Subai pointed to the fat man's pocket, "those 3 drops of blood are still there. If those llamas really, what kind of game was arranged in front of us? The worst is, we will hurt each other again. If you want my life, you can, but they must come and be buried with me." Subai said so, and the fat man naturally nodded in agreement. "Don't worry, Professor, I will try my best to keep you safe." The old man should not be the kind of person who has strengthened the melee system. Although he is also an experienced audience, when everyone gathers together, he will suffer accordingly. Just like the fat man, he was almost killed by Gyatso's little fangirl in a sneak attack before. Same. Then, go down, and have a look. You will die if you hear the truth in the morning. The old man in the audience clearly had an aura of an old scholar. Subai and Fatty also went down together. Nearly 200 Qin soldiers were arranged in a square formation, including crossbowmen, cavalry leading horses, and armored soldiers, but each of them was frozen. This kind of freezing is different from the hibernation that appears in some science fiction movies and can be resurrected after the ice melts. They are just like these Tibetan ancestors who were in the ice and crystal, completely losing their vitality and already died. Obviously, it was not the Qin army that these Tibetan ancestors were prostrating and worshipping. This should be a battlefield, and the object that the Tibetan ancestors were kneeling to was exactly the target of the Qin army's battle. When the ancestors of Tibet had given up resistance and knelt on the ground to beg for mercy, this Qin army stood and planned to fight on. A kind of sad aura emanates from them, and even after more than 2,000 years, it still does not dissipate. The woman in a down jacket picked up 2 black feathers from the ground and exclaimed, "What kind of animal feathers are these?" Immediately afterwards, the others also made their own discoveries, such as broken armor, broken shields, and even gorgeous but torn clothes. Moreover, the styles of these things were obviously Western. Klaus seemed very calm, his eyes wandering around from time to time, obviously waiting for something. The man surnamed Joe and the fat man stood together again. From time to time, the two of them picked up some things on the ground and studied the remaining formation patterns on them. There are many treasures here, but they are all the remains of treasures and have basically lost their efficacy and function. Subai and the old man were observing the Qin army's formation. The old man shook his head as he looked. "No, it shouldn't be like this. This is not the Qin army's normal combat formation. What's wrong? Didn't you see that their combat target came not from the parallel ground, but from the air?" the old man said with some confusion. "I think we can take another look at this. These 2 horses should not be used as mounts." Subai pointed to the back of the Qin army's formation and said, "The 2 horses should be used to pull carts. Here, Feng, there seems to be something underneath the soil." Subai bent down and reached out to touch. The frozen soil was very hard, but Subai still pried it open a little. Below, a silver frame appeared. Suddenly, Subai remembered the scene in his memory, that the vampire was sitting in a silver prison carriage, with the first emperor's chariot in front of him, and the army was crossing the river. This is a prison car, but how could it be silver, and it's also mithril? The old man lowered his voice, appearing to be in disbelief. What is this prison car used for? However, at this moment, a Sanskrit sound suddenly sounded, and then, pieces of golden snowflakes fell. These snowflakes did not fall anywhere else, but fell intently on the frozen soil in front of Subai and the old man. What happened? Subai stood up and looked at the black man. The rest of the audience also looked at Klaus. Klaus smiled slightly, took out a cross from his arms, and began to pray, surrounded by a layer of sacred aura. The fat man and the young man named Joe looked at each other with horrified expressions. The woman in the down jacket took a few steps back and took a defensive stance. "I want to see what the hell it is." The man in the t-shirt seemed more decisive, and a halberd appeared in his hand. This was his natural weapon. The frozen soil in front of Subai and the old man began to roll outwards, and 2 silver prison cars began to appear. In the prison cars, the people trapped were not humans, but 2 beings that surprised everyone present. Broken feathers, pierced chests, broken bodies, dirty or sacred auras are constantly intertwined. Surrounded by broken spears and broken armors. There was an angel in each of the 2 prison cars, one with a holy aura, and the other with a fallen aura. These 2 angels were obviously dead. They died in the prison car, and most of the skin, flesh, and bones on their bodies were broken. There is no way to cover it up. However, when the pieces of golden snowflakes fell on them, another kind of activity appeared on their bodies. Their bodies began to tremble, followed closely by two terrifying pressures. Boom! Boom! The holy white aura and the dirty black aura burst out together and swept around, as if these two angels were about to be resurrected. Subai and the old man were the first to bear the brunt and began to retreat. The young man named Joe and the fat man were also retreating. The rest of the people were also retreating because they could not withstand this terrible pressure. Only Klaus, holding the cross, remains motionless. Klaus, are you and those old llamas planning to attack us? Aren't you afraid of the punishment of the broadcast? These two angels who are about to be resurrected already have the aura of high-level listeners. Once they are really resurrected, they will definitely be crushed to death for all the listeners present. Klaus said calmly, this is to bless them and dissolve the hostility in them so that they can dissipate as soon as possible and get relief. Otherwise, if they stay here for a day, it will be difficult for the weather to be smooth. Here are a few of them. Lamas and eminent monks are praying for Tibet and eliminating disasters. Their existence, even corpses, are not allowed by the broadcast. Therefore, the actions of several masters are actually complying with the meaning of the broadcast and integrating everything in the real world. The disharmonious factors are erased. This kind of blessing will make them have a tendency to come back to life, giving them the illusion of resurrection in a short period of time. Although they will eventually be wiped out, there is enough time in this world for them to kill everyone here 10 times. The old man roared. Ah, this is not what I know. It was just an accident. Klaus continued to hold his cross. Obviously, when the power of the cross enveloped him, the pressure of the two angels naturally avoided him. He opened his eyes, apparently regarding him as a kindred spirit. Click. Click. The already damaged prison car was completely torn apart at this moment, and the two broken angels stood up slowly at this time. The holy brilliance and the depraved whale were revealed respectively, and the terrifying aura equivalent to that of a high-level audience roared up. Moreover, they targeted everyone present except Klaus with their murderous intentions without any cover. There's the soul-reviving bell, use it, Subai shouted to the old man beside him while resisting the terrifying pressure. However, they have been resurrected and are in a state of recovery. My soul bell cannot make them fall asleep in a short period of time. The old man was obviously very panicked at this time. Subai pointed at the Qin army's formation and shouted, use the soul returning bell to summon the souls of the Qin army. Quick, quick. The old man was stunned for a moment. Obviously, he didn't think it was useful to summon the undead souls of the Qin army in the face of two terrifying angels. No matter how strong the Qin army was, it was just a human army, but these two angels could be called gods. Only existence. Don't hesitate, hurry up, or we will all die. The old man pursed his lips and began to recite a spell. Subai stood in front of the old man and helped him resist the pressure and eliminate interference. The soul is back. The old man rang the bell. The Qin army's formation, which had been frozen, suddenly shook at this moment. Clang! 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 The sound of uniformed soldiers and armor rose solemnly. Then, there was a faint sound coming from the empty space, like an ancient song, echoing forever. Jijiao Lao Qin, we will fight against the national calamity together. Jijiao Lao Qin, we will fight against the national calamity together. Jijiao Lao Qin, we will fight against the national calamity together. The Qin army's formation actually did not move. They were already dead and frozen. These sounds were entirely the result of the bell summoning the memories of their dead souls. However, amidst the roars of the dead souls who said old Qin bravely fought against the national calamity together / the two angels who had just been resurrected were suddenly frightened and fell to their knees on the ground. Their broken wings did not dare to open and closed on themselves. The broken spear also let go and fell to the ground, and the breath from their bodies was completely gone. They are begging for mercy. They are begging. They are afraid. They are afraid. They put aside their arrogance and dignity and knelt down in front of a human army. They were as humble as slaves and comparable to ants. Their bodies began to dissipate at an accelerated speed, as if they did not dare to stay here for one more second, for fear of arousing the anger of the army in front of them. They were meant to die, and this was a kind of return to light. Now they are so afraid that they do not even ask for this return of light. Bang dang! Klaus's cross fell to the ground, and he was extremely puzzled by the scene in front of him. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 469. The ancient war hymn kept echoing in this narrow space. It was a roar from the soul, sonorous from the heart. More than 2,000 years ago, this Qin army left their capital Xianyang, left Hang Pass, and headed westward, overcoming thorns, and finally reached the depths of Tibet, which was still an uncivilized wasteland at that time. No one knows the purpose of this Qin army coming all the way here, and no one knows where the two angels detained in the prison car behind them came from, and no one knows what enemy they faced in the end. Eventually died in battle and were collectively frozen. However, just look at the ugly appearance of these thousands of Tibetan ancestors prostrate themselves on the ground and kowtow in worship, and then look at the high-spirited attacking posture of this Qin army. It can be found that this Qin army has been practicing their beliefs, practicing their style, and practicing their oath and promise to Zilong when they left Hang Pass in the east. No matter who the enemy is, no matter how powerful the enemy is, only one war song accompanies them. Jeju and Lao Qin fought against the national calamity together. The old Qin dynasty restored our rivers and mountains. There will be no truce until the blood is shed dry. Now there is the great Qin, which is rising like the sun. Qin has sharp men, who can compete with him. Subai listened to the voice that echoed in his ears. Even though he was a vampire, he felt a sense of passion and heroism at this moment. The old man next to him who was holding the soul resurrection bell was actually in tears. Flow all over face. Since this professor has managed to become a senior audience member, he is definitely not a kind person. He must have done a lot of dirty things involving murder and arson. It is not impossible for him to even disrespect a female teacher and a female student in the school. But perhaps because of his professional expertise, he is deeply obsessed with history. At least at this time, his tears are not hypocrisy or pretense. Even Fatty, the guy who usually laughs and laughs, had a rare serious expression when he heard this song. The blood-raising man is holding a halberd, his fingers trembling slightly. The halberd is a very ancient weapon. Being able to choose it as his natural weapon shows that he is also a nostalgic person. The woman in the down jacket also stood up slightly. The one who was in the worst situation was probably Klaus. In fact, all the other audience members present had their suspicions and wariness. Those old llamas didn't show up. It was obvious that there was something wrong, or it was the old llamas themselves. If something goes wrong, there is no way to show up, or he is stirring up bad things and preparing to scheme against people. How can there be any fool who can reach the level of a senior audience? And everyone knows that the probability of the latter is higher, because from a normal person's perspective, if something happens to you, such as being damaged or unable to come, how can you give the good things you discovered to others to enjoy? The two angels were kneeling in the damaged prison car. Their feathers were being extinguished, their remaining flesh and blood was dissipating, and their breath was like moths flying into the flame. They seemed to be still strong, but they were already strong on the outside but dry on the inside. A handful of dry firewood, after burning to the maximum extent, is actually very close to being extinguished. Klaus looked around. He was looking for traces of those llamas, but he couldn't find them. Maybe these llamas were really injured and couldn't come. The Sanskrit sounds and golden snowflakes just now should be that several lamas had arranged a trick here in advance, but as the war song sounded, the two ancient angels knelt down and died. This directly put Klaus in the spotlight. The war songs gradually became lower. The Qin army was still frozen. They had not changed at all. Just like the previous 2,000 years, they would continue to stand in this posture, just like the poplars in the desert. Go on, even if they are dead, even if there are no enemies in front of them, their beliefs will never change. Even if their souls return 2,000 years after their death, they will still sing Jijiao Lao Qin, we will fight against the national calamity together. The generosity. The woman in down continued to take a dozen steps back, and the man in t-shirt also took a few steps forward. These two people directly blocked Klaus's retreat. The fat man looked at the man named Joe and said, "Wan, you are finished." The young man surnamed Joe shook his head, "I just happened to drive over with him on the same road, so I saw him half a day earlier than you." After saying that, 2 handfuls of sand appeared in the hands of the young man named Joe. The sand waved and scattered in front of Klaus, further blocking Klaus's room to move. When the war song was completely silent, and when the 2 angels turned into dust, the old man in the audience took a deep breath, then turned around, looked at Klaus, and shouted, "He who is not of my race will be killed." Now everyone knows that he wants to kill us, so we should not be polite. According to the cause and effect of the broadcast, everyone should come together and kill him. As for the things here, since the Qin army is here, it proves that they are Chinese things and Chinese things. They have nothing to do with these black devils and red-haired ghosts, and they have nothing to do with those traitors who do not regard themselves as Chinese. Relationship, we can redistribute the things here. Let's kill this outsider first. As expected of an old university professor, this theory goes hand in hand, and he directly characterizes this place as his own. However, according to the cause and effect of the broadcast, when everyone knew that Klaus brought everyone here deliberately and wanted to kill everyone with the return of the 2 angels, they could actually take action against him, or even, kill him. As for what Klaus said before, it was an unintentional act. This was an excuse to face the radio after the incident was completed. The broadcast would indeed reduce the penalty for this, but now that the incident has not occurred, the listeners he originally wanted to trick are still alive. Just like what happened at the foot of the Purple Mountain, if Subai Gyatso and the 3 monks had been next to the Purple Mountain instead of returning to Shanghai, they could have come over and killed those lamas who tried to kill themselves and others. Oh, it's okay. The reason why those lamas ran back immediately was not because they were afraid of punishment from the broadcast, but because they were worried about the revenge from Subai and others, so they hurriedly fled back to their hometown. Subai relaxed his neck and looked at the black man in front of him. To be honest, Subai's hands were itchy. "Kill me, and I guarantee that none of you can get out." Klaus also calmed down his previous panic at this time, and his black face made it easier to hide emotions than yellow people. However, there were all human beings present, how could they not see that he was scared? "Let me leave, otherwise, everything will be ruined," Klaus warned. "Are you mentally retarded?" The fat man rolled up his sleeves and walked up. "Hey, it turns out that black people generally have low IQs." The woman in the down jacket and the man in the t-shirt began to approach step by step. A ruler also appeared in the old man's hand, and the ruler exuded a green light. Even the young man surnamed Joe has already made up his mind and started to use the sand on the ground to form a formation. Obviously. "Let you go? Impossible." Taking a deep breath, a smile appeared on the corner of Klaus's mouth. This smile seemed a little crazy and a little hysterical. Looking at his expression at this time, it really fit the saying, "A dog jumps over the wall in a hurry." The habit of listeners is to leave themselves a trump card in everything. This is common to both Eastern and Western listener circles. Something like a remote control appeared in Klaus's hand, because before I don't know if the promises made by those old llamas can be fulfilled, and I don't know if these two angels can really kill all of you as they said. Therefore, I have arranged some backup tactics in advance. On the cliff, I placed some TNT explosives in advance. You should know how deep this crack is. As an audience, it took us an hour and a half to climb down. Just imagine, what would happen if I detonated those explosives? Unless you have a teleportation scroll with space attributes in your hands, and it must be of intermediate level or above, even advanced listeners will be buried alive and crushed into pulp. Intermediate space teleportation scroll. This thing is extremely expensive and has no market. Which of you has it? I see, there aren't any, right? Klaus gently waved the button in his hand. It seemed that at this time, he finally calmed down. Now, you have two choices. One is to continue coming up and prepare to kill me, and then I will drag you to be buried with you, crushed by boulders, and buried alive deep underground. The other one, just let me leave. You know, if I leave, there is no way I can detonate the explosives. Because I deliberately and directly kill so many senior listeners, I will definitely be pulled into the world of punishment stories and killed by the broadcast. But if I can't survive, the punishment of broadcasting will be meaningless to me, right? The choice is in your hands, it depends on whether you are afraid of death. Klaus shrugged his shoulders and even laughed, because he knew the audience too well. Cherish life, cherish life. Besides cherishing life, cherish life. At this time, Klaus was very glad that he did not listen to the nonsense of those old llamas and kept his own methods. Otherwise, he would have been killed long ago, and his magic weapon would have been plundered to benefit others. The scene fell into silence for a while, and the woman in the down jacket and the man in the t-shirt stopped approaching. He. As soon as laughter came from the crowd. I'm so scared. The laughter came from Subai, who was walking towards Klaus through the man in the t-shirt and the woman in the down jacket, covering his chest with one hand, as if he was overjoyed. The young man surnamed Joe suddenly found that the fat man next to him was trembling, and the fat on his face began to tremble. He asked with some confusion, "Kyangwo man, what's wrong with you?" He. The fat man raised his finger and pointed at Subai's back, speaking a little incoherently. "Didn't he come up to negotiate?" said the young man surnamed Joe. Obviously, not only him, but also the elderly audience, the man in the t-shirt, the woman in the down jacket, and even the black man Klaus all felt that Subai came up to negotiate. "Now, I just said a few harsh words to save face so that I can step down easily. I will have to give in for my own life later." "Lovely Wan, you are so naive." The fat man took a deep breath, his nose and tears almost fell down, and his whole face was filled with tears. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 470. When Subai walked out, Klaus breathed a sigh of relief. In his opinion, the other party was looking for face, and he was looking for a way out. Orientals just like face. Klaus was already thinking about whether he should lower his stance a little more and give the other party enough face. He could even promise some story points or unusable magic weapons as compensation. It wasn't worth much anyway, but it could just let these Eastern people feel satisfied with their appearance. If everyone takes a step back, everyone will be happy, right? Anyway, he really couldn't bring any substantial harm to them. Until now, Klaus still couldn't figure out that those two angels who had just awakened and possessed great power were inexplicably surrounded by the war songs of the souls of a group of human soldiers. They were wiped out in ashes. They were gods who held an extremely high position in the Western mythology system. They were actually crouching down and trembling in front of human soldiers. What's going on in this world? God, my worldview. This is a true portrayal of Klaus's heart. Although he is a black man, he has settled in Western Europe since his grandfather. Therefore, his worldview, history, and culture are completely in line with the West. However, soon, immediately, Klaus felt that his worldview had been destroyed once again. Boom! A gunshot sounded. Hit Klaus. Klaus didn't even have time to react. He lowered his head and saw the transparent blood hole pierce through his chest. The corners of his mouth twitched involuntarily. Does this mean that you don't even bother to talk? Or was he convinced that he had deceived him? He just believed that the remote control in his hand was fake and concluded that he didn't set off the bomb. Where did he get his confidence? This gunshot shocked everyone present, except of course Fatty, because when Fatty walked past Sudbai and said the words "I'm so scared," he actually had a premonition in his heart. Now, it was just a premonition that became reality. Klaus wanted to say something, but he didn't know what to say. He instinctively felt that the rest of the Oriental listeners should have different ideas from this Oriental young man. He felt that he should give these Oriental listeners a chance opportunity, let them persuade this Oriental young man. After all, Klaus himself didn't want to be buried alive. However, Sudbai did not give him a chance to speak again, nor did he give the surrounding Eastern audience a chance to react or stop him. He calmly said, "Keep pulling the trigger." In fact, Sudbai has been unhappy and depressed for a long time since he was tricked by those old llamas last time. Okay. Now I can't find those old llamas where they are, and now I have to be threatened by you, a nigger? Grass. At worst, let's GG together. Who are you threatening? When Sudbai pulled the trigger again, Klaus knew that he had no time and no chance. The opponent's first shot was fired by the opponent standing majestically in front of him, causing him great harm and even being seriously injured. He killed himself because he never expected that the other party would be so direct, so without any hesitation, so crazy. This also put Klaus into a very embarrassing situation. He had completely withstood the blow from the Hellfire shotgun. Now he no longer had the ability to confront Sudbai head-on. He could not even deal with Sudbai to delay the attack. The rest of the audience might have no chance of stopping Sudbai. In fact, the rest of the audience might immediately change their minds, take the opportunity to snatch the remote control from their hands, or even leave the cave early. There really wasn't much time left for them. Snapped. Klaus pressed the button. Then. Let's die together. Fortunately, Klaus did not lose his fierceness that belonged to the audience at the last moment. Since you won't let me live, then let's die together. Let's die together. Boom. 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 5 consecutive violent explosions came from above. These explosives should have been placed in the rock wall of the ground crack before, and they were just above everyone, so the power of the explosion could be released to the greatest extent, and then this extremely deep ground crack would collapse. The women in down jackets, the men in t-shirts, the young man named Joe, and the elderly audience were all in a state of bewilderment at this time, with 10,000 horses racing through their minds. What exactly is going on? Why are they all about to die together inexplicably? Is there something wrong with the script? Huge rocks began to fall down continuously, first one after another, and then one after another. The woman in the down jacket ran towards the entrance of the cave and quickly moved away, avoiding a huge rock, but she had not yet had time to be thankful that a piece of rock above her head directly pressed down. She let out a scream, and a petal appeared in her palm. She wanted to hold onto the rock wall above her head to give herself time to escape. However, God knows how terrifying this rock mass is. The mountain-like pressure is no longer an exaggerated rhetorical device here, but a declarative sentence. Bah! The woman in the down jacket was crushed like this, and a trace of blood splashed out like liquid. At this moment, everyone suddenly realized that even though they usually thought of themselves as gods, here, in this environment, they were actually no different from ants. Ha 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 ha. Klaus kept laughing. Ha 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 ha. Sudbai was also laughing. Stones kept hitting Sudbai's body, but Sudbai didn't take it seriously. Bones were constantly being smashed out of his body, and the bones were exposed, but Sudbai still didn't take it seriously. The two of them laughed hysterically at the end, but in the end, Klaus's laughter turned into crying. He didn't want to die, he really didn't want to die, he still had so many lovers, and he still had a lot of things. He didn't enjoy it enough. He still had many things he wanted to do. He really wanted to live. The man in the t-shirt ran directly towards the entrance of the cave. Although the entrance had collapsed, there were still many gaps left, enough for him to pass through. The woman in the down jacket had been smashed to death. At this time, no one came to look for Grams. Laws or Sudbai settle accounts. Now, time is life, time is really life. Escape early, even if it is 1 second earlier, you can survive. Boom. The ripples and chain reactions of the explosion began to appear, which was equivalent to a big mountain, starting to move downwards. This is different from the collapse of buildings during earthquakes, where gaps will appear below due to beams or reinforced concrete blocks, because this is the entire cave. The surface layer above has moved downwards as a whole, so all the gaps in this position will eventually be filled tightly, and everyone here will die. The man in the t-shirt had just rushed to a position 100 meters away from the entrance of the cave. A large piece of rock slid down from above. The man in the t-shirt swung his big halberd and chopped it down. The rock was broken into pieces, but he didn't have time to go any further. After a few steps, another rock came down, and he chopped it into pieces again, and then another whole piece came down. This time, the man in the t-shirt couldn't chop it anymore. His big halberd struck up, which of course shattered part of the rock, leaving it untouched. It turned into dust, but this rock was extremely huge and rolled down directly. The man in the t-shirt is now pushing hard against it. Puff. A mouthful of blood spurted out from the t-shirt man's mouth, and immediately after, blood mist overflowed from the pores on his body. In the end, his bones began to break and his flesh began to crack. Finally, he reluctantly turned his head and looked behind him. He was looking for Sudbai's location. He hated it so much. Buzz. Finally, the man in the t-shirt and the woman in the down jacket met the same end. Go there, go to the middle, it's a little slower there, the fat man shouted to the audience of the young man named Joe and the old man beside him. The three people immediately arrived at the location of the Qin Army's military formation. The people above were actually pressing down continuously, but at a slightly slower speed. But in at least half a minute, the place would be pressed tightly without any gaps. I'm going to die, I'm going to die, the young man named Joe began to mutter to himself in a panic. How could this happen? How could it become like this? The old audience still couldn't believe what was happening in front of them. The fat man was looking for Sudbai, and soon he found him, because Sudbai grabbed Klaus, who had completely given up resistance, and walked here. Klaus was cursing, swearing, and roaring, using it in English, but it pretty much means you're going to die with me, you Oriental bastards, and that kind of thing. Sudbai took his time and bit open his neck and began to suck blood, taking his time and enjoying it as before, as if he was having the Last Supper. For some reason, Fatty couldn't be angry with Sudbai. Maybe Fatty really had antibodies, but this time, everyone was really going to die together. They were buried alive together, haha, buried alive. Sudbai threw the body of the black man who had sucked people's dick on the ground. At this time, the rock formation above was less than 1 meter away from everyone's heads. The surrounding rock formations had already collapsed and slid down, so that the frozen Qinjun as the center of the circle, there is only this small vacuum area left around it, and it is being continuously compressed and compressed again. I'm going to die, Dabai, the fat man looked at Subai and sighed, I'm really going to be killed by you this time. I'm going to die. The young man surnamed Joe stared at Subai with angry eyes, and even the old man did the same. If conditions and circumstances had not allowed it, they might have taken action against Subai. But Subai didn't take it seriously at all. He had just sucked the blood of a strong person in the audience, and he was like a drug addict who had just taken drugs. At this moment, he was all high. At the same time, Subai also pointed at the old man in the audience, ring that bell a few more times. I want to listen to the song for a while. The song is really nice. How do you sing it? Zhejiang Laoqin. Boom. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 471. Boom. The explosion this time was no longer caused by the rocks above their heads falling more intensely, but because the ground beneath everyone's feet cracked. Immediately, a carriage that had been buried deep under the Qin army's corpse formation was revealed. Figure. Damn, carriage, Fatty exclaimed. This carriage is very big, not the kind of little old man's carriage seen in Ming and Qing TV dramas. Its size is comparable to a heavy truck. Even if it has been buried deep in the ground for more than 2,000 years, its magnificence has not been polished away. What's even more bizarre is that although the corpses of these Qin soldiers are no longer so neat due to cracks in the ground, they still maintain their upright posture. They really look like old white poplars standing tall in the desert. However, although the carriage appeared, the sliding rocks above their heads were no longer waiting for people. Now they were basically only half a meter away from their heads. Get in the carriage, Fatty gritted his teeth, expect a miracle to happen. There is no other way. Although no one believes that this carriage can block the huge rocks that are constantly collapsing overhead, at least there is still a space in the carriage. Even if you die, there is still a coffin, right? The fat man rushed over first. Half of the carriage was still stuck in the rocks. The fat man forced his way in through the side window. If he had been fatter, he really wouldn't have been able to get in. Immediately afterwards, the young man surnamed Joe and the old audience also got in. Only Subai was still standing outside the carriage. Although he was leaning against the carriage, he had not come in. At this time, the rock above his head was only 10 centimeters away from his head. Babai, get the hum in here. Did you three have a short circuit in your brain at this time? Subai punched the top of the carriage, directly punching a groove in the carriage's weight. With this hardness, you actually want to hide in it? Subai had an expression on his face that said, you are too stupid, don't say I know you. When we hid in there together and were squashed into a pulp, I feel like I'm in the middle of you, and I feel sick just thinking about it. In the carriage, when the young man surnamed Joe and the old man heard this, their faces suddenly turned green. They immediately looked at the fat man next to them. It was obvious that the fat man had a lot of flesh on his body. If the three of them were really squashed into meat paste, I guess I have to be together with this fat man. That scene is really chilling. The Qin army corpses were all frozen around the carriage. Because half of the carriage was stuck in the crack, these Qin army corpses were generally half taller and smaller than the carriage. Subai stretched out his hand tentatively and struck a Qin Bing beside him. The ice attached to the Qin Bing broke immediately, but when Subai's fist struck the Qin Bing's body, he immediately let out a kind of sound. The clang sound made Subai's hands hurt. Really? Subai's face showed excitement, and he immediately took out the muzzle of his Hellfire shotgun and pointed it directly at the Qin soldiers in front of him, and then pulled the trigger without hesitation. Boom. Subai is well aware of the power of the Hellfire shotgun, especially after Subai fused it as his natal weapon. Its power has increased to a higher level than before. However, at this time, the Hellfire shotgun, the power of the gun could only leave a faint black mark on the opponent's shoulder where there was no armor, and it did not even break the skin. Immediately, the memory picture appeared in Subai's mind. A group of Qin troops marching in a neat square formation swept away the evil spirits in a crushing manner. The ancestral dragon was strong. He could smash the black dragon with the jade seal and throw a whip to cut off the river at the same time. But the ancestral dragon, the truly terrifying thing about the dragon is that he has an army that is loyal to him. In that era, the powerful Qin army was the real support for the ancestral dragon to sweep across the land and unify China. It is no wonder that the ancestral dragon and the emperor were recorded in the history books of later generations. The army under his command basically conquers, and conquers again. With such a terrifying army, what else can it do if it doesn't conquer? The Qin army of that era was really powerful and terrifying. Subai couldn't help but reached out and touched the shoulder of the soldier's corpse. A single soldier was so powerful. Even if he were to fight with others, he probably wouldn't have much chance of winning. So, 200 soldiers. One Qin army? 100,000 Qin army? 500,000 Qin troops? What kind of terrifying army are they? Even the modern steel armies of the 5 major countries would have no chance of winning against the Qin army of that period, because that was equivalent to an audience of at least hundreds of thousands of seniors and above. This kind of terrifying power, even in today's technological civilization 2000 years later, is enough to easily sweep across the world, right? Subai pursed his lips, and he thought of the Macedonian legions under Alexander the Great during the Alexander period. They slaughtered those demonic beasts in Egypt like chopping melons and vegetables. It is conceivable that during that period, both the East and the West had the huge and terrifying empire has a group of legions that are almost like gods in the eyes of future generations. But why is history cut off? Why did Alexander the Great and Zalong suddenly die suddenly? Why did those two powerful empires, each of which conquered half of the world at that time, vanish into ashes in such a short period of time? Dabai, the rock is coming down, Fatty shouted in the carriage. Subai didn't move much. He just turned around slowly and looked around. This carriage was wrapped in so many Qin army corpses. Maybe they could create a miracle. Subai squatted down, kneeling on one knee on the ground, half squatting. The mountain above his head slid down and directly hit the heads and shoulders of these Qin soldiers. Click, click, click. A crisp sound came out. Boulders stopped. Everything around was packed tightly by the huge pressure supported by the mountain, but only a small area around the carriage as the center of the circle, because of the nearly 200 Qin army corpses, supported about half a person. In a higher space, the carriage was half stuck in the cracked rock, and the surrounding Qin troops were half taller than the carriage, so the carriage was also protected. These Qin army corpses used their heads and shoulders to form 200 pillars, supporting a flat surface and carrying this area down. Otherwise, Subai, the fat man in the carriage, and others would really be like meat now. Waving his hands to disperse the debris and dust around him, Subai shook his head, breathed a long sigh of relief, looked into the carriage, and shouted, "I have good news and bad news for you. Which one are you going to listen to?" "Listen first," Fatty replied from inside. "The good news is that we don't have to worry about becoming meat sauce for the time being." "What about the bad ones?" "The bad thing is, it seems we can't get out." Subai stretched out his hand and touched the rock wall above him. To be honest, Subai had his own advantage when facing this kind of pure physical attack. He could turn into blood mist to avoid most of the damage, but the movement of blood mist distance and time are extremely limited. Normally, it can be used to carry out sneak attacks through walls and dodge instantaneous attacks. But if you want to turn yourself into a blood mist and directly penetrate a distance as deep as countless football fields, it's simply a fantasy. Maybe he got stuck in the tight rocks before he moved very far. When the time comes, his end will be even worse. "Dabai, please get into the carriage." "There is something found in the carriage," the fat man shouted from the carriage, sounding very excited. "No, Let's come out first. This was the voice of the old man's audience. Immediately afterwards, he climbed out of the carriage window. The ruler in the old man's hand radiated brilliance, like a fireworks stick, filling the narrow space. Illuminated clearly. Sure enough, it's true. The old listener calmed down. I was surprised at that time. How could they scare two angels trembling with just a group of human soldiers? Moreover, if they were ordinary humans, after two for more than 1,000 years, even the souls of those who died unjustly could no longer bear the passage of time and dissipated. However, when I used the soul-chasing bell to summon their souls, I found that their soul marks were still clear, even if the real souls are gone, but the obsession deep in their souls still stands here like their corpses. This is definitely not something that ordinary humans can do after death. The old audience member looked at Sudbai and said, "You already knew this, right?" Sudbai shrugged, non-committal. "Well, no matter what, they can be considered our ancestors, and now they have saved our lives. They deserve my respect." The old audience actually knelt down and kowtowed to these Qin soldiers. Many people in the temple like to worship and kneel before Buddha, but not many people really know the standard and serious posture. This old man obviously used the most standard posture and was meticulous. The young man surnamed Zhou also climbed out of the window at this time, and like the old man, kowtowed to these Qin soldiers. Sudbai was not so pretentious. When he walked to the carriage, the fat man was lying by the window. Looking at the two people kowtowing there, he sighed a little. "I feel more and more cute about this place now." "Well, it sounds like you have found true love." Dabai, fatty, my orientation is quite normal," the fat man said righteously. "Anyway, you were deflowered later. What if you learned the taste of marrow after that time?" Sudbai asked back. The fat man's face was full of black lines. "Dabai, if you mention this again, do you believe that I will go crazy and kill you?" "Haha, you just said you found something, what was it?" Sudbai changed the subject. The fat man smiled and said, "You will know when you come in and see for yourself. This carriage is so high-end that it actually has a magic circle inside, and it is very likely that it is an intermediate space teleportation array. Even more advanced." When he said this, the fat man's eyes immediately lit up. "You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment." Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 472. Sudbai also climbed into the carriage, and the fat man's few will-o'-the-wisps were suspended in the carriage, illuminating the place quite clearly. "Dabai, do you know what this word is?" the fat man asked. At the bottom of the carriage, there are many grooves with mysterious patterns. Because the carriage is large, the bottom area is also very large, and the patterns are very fine. It seems that if you look at it a few more times, your whole mind will be unbearable. I can't help but get addicted to it. Sudbai didn't know the formation, but even a fool could tell that this thing was unusual. As for the characters that the fat man asked about, they should be on the walls of the carriage. There are no illustrations, but there are some characters. There are not many characters, but they are all obscure and difficult to understand. For a layman, they can tell that they are ancient Chinese characters. "Xiaozuan," Sudbai replied, "it's Xiaozuan." "Damn, yes, Dabai, I feel like you can go to university and become a history professor now," Fatty exclaimed, because he discovered the teleportation circle in the carriage. For Fatty, on the one hand, there was a chance of getting out alive. I felt a lot more relaxed. On the other hand, I was happy to see Hunter. As an array master, encountering a well-preserved array from the pre-Qin period was really no different from a pervert seeing a beautiful woman. I used to have a lot of seals collected in my study. Most of the words on the seals were in small seal script. Sudbai exhaled and stretched out his hand to touch the wall gently. The small seal script was implemented after Qin Shi Huang unified China. The cultural unification policy of the same text, the same track for cars, and the unification of weights and measures was the responsibility of Prime Minister Li Si. On the basis of the large seal script originally used by the Qin state, he simplified it, cancelled the other 6 kingdoms' scripts, and created a unified script. It was only after the end of the Western Han dynasty that it was gradually replaced by the official script, but the seal still retained the habit of using small seal script for engraving. Subai turned around and looked at the fat man. Since this is a carriage escorted by the army during the Qin dynasty, it is of course normal for small seal characters to appear in the carriage. Can you understand Dabai? The fat man asked. Subai shook his head. I only know a few words, but I can't understand what these paragraphs mean. The old professor should be able to understand it, right? He can understand it? There must be some message hidden in it. Each of us can understand it, but I always feel uneasy. The fat man said what was in his heart. At this time, he shouldn't be hiding anything. Doesn't the magic circle below have to be repaired and activated by you and the man named Zhe? They are just using each other. At this time, the young man surnamed Zhou and the old listeners who had finished their kowtows outside also began to come back. The old listener climbed in through the car window first, followed by the young man surnamed Zhou. There is no food and water here, fatty. How long will it take for the 2 of you to activate the circle? Subai asked. The young man surnamed Zhou pondered for a while, and looked at each other with the fat man. The magic circle is well preserved. Even the spiritual power required for activation can be replaced by the blood essence of the 4 of us. But what the 2 of us have to do now is the preliminary work: find out some of the context of the magic circle, so as to ensure that we can be teleported upward instead of left, right or downward. This magic circle is too profound. The 2 of us can only barely determine one direction. As for it is impossible to fix a specific coordinate to a specific location. The fat man nodded. This formation, even the Western space magic enhanced audience will probably be blinded. Although there are many formations handed down in the East, which are somewhat similar to this one, I have never seen it so original. It's completely orthodox. If you just want to teleport us upwards, it will take about 12 hours to figure it out and start it. 12 hours? Subai pursed his lips. 12 hours without eating or drinking is not a big problem. The old audience member interjected at this time. Aren't you curious about what the Qin army of 200 people is doing escorting the carriage deep into the hinterland of Tibet? Old man, if you fart, let it go as soon as possible. We are not here for an outdoor archaeology class, the fat man muttered. The old professor shook his head, obviously dissatisfied with the fat man's learning attitude. He pointed to these words and said, according to the words above, this Qin army was escorting a princess to the depths of Tibet. Tribe. Marriage? Asked the young man named Zhou. This is normal. Although the young man surnamed Zhou is not a mainlander, the history textbooks in Taiwan are mostly similar except for the 2 major aspects of modern history and historical peasant uprisings. Since ancient times, the Central Plains dynasty has sent princesses to barbarians, which has always represented a kind of compromise and humiliation. Is this a marriage team? Fatty asked in disbelief. Was there a powerful country in Tibet back then? So powerful that the first emperor had to send his princess to marry him. The old professor seemed very satisfied that the fat man and the young man named Zhou had wrong ideas, which gave him the satisfaction of teaching. No, no. Yang Zheng is a man who compares himself to the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, so he calls himself emperor. He is the first to truly unify China, and he is called Zilong by later generations. Do you want a person like this to swallow his anger? Are you asking him to be humble to other countries? Is it even possible to send the princess to get married? Damn, you're still showing off, the fat man said dissatisfied. This princess was sent to the depths of Tibet to hold the ancestral dragon letter talisman, representing the ancestral dragon to integrate the Tibetan ancestor tribes. At that time the old professor looked at the text on the wall and said, "She was not sent to be the wife of the tribal leader, but let the Tibetan ancestor tribe at that time give her a grandson." This is what is written on this wall. There is another one on the opposite side, and the font is different from the one on this side. It should have been written later. Sudbai pointed to the wall of the carriage opposite and asked. "Well, yes, it was written down later." The old audience member walked to the opposite side and took out his ruler so that the small seal characters could be seen more clearly. The meaning of the record here is that the princess was escorted to Tibet. After that, holding the ancestral dragon letter talisman, he quickly took the ancestor tribes in Tibet under his command. At first, they fought with people with wings, who would turn into bats, blood-sucking people, werewolves, and strangely dressed people. The army fights. A scene from the vampire's memory immediately appeared in Sudbai's mind. Could it be that Alexander the Great came here during his eastern expedition? But the two people don't seem to match up in historical time. There is a 100-year time gap between Alexander the Great and the first emperor. Even if there is an error in the calculation of historical time, it will not be such a big difference. But the words that followed explained Sudbai's doubts. Those strange armies must have been defeated. They were driven from the west to the east. They wanted to establish a new territory here to recuperate. The princess led the Tibetan ancestor tribes to fight with them for a long time. Finally, the princess won the victory, captured many of them, and sent people to escort them back to Xianyang to offer prisoners to Zilong. Alexander the Great's army was defeated by a terrifying entity, and then the remnants fled eastward and ran into the Tibetan ancestor tribe alliance army organized by the Princess of Qin. As a result, the defeated army from the west was defeated. This corresponds to the second paragraph in the memory screen. The vampires in the research institute should have been taken as prisoners and sent to the first emperor of Xianyang. Sudbai thought so in his heart. It's just. The old professor paused, as if he had difficulty understanding the last few paragraphs. You've got it right again, tell me quickly, the story is exciting, the fat man urged. I can't understand the last two paragraphs either. The rough translation is that darkness fell and a truly terrible enemy appeared. The Tibetan ancestor tribe under the princess was defeated by that terrible enemy. The alliance also collapsed. Many the ancestors of Tibet crawled under the feet of darkness and begged for their lives. The princess led 200 Qin troops to resist, and were finally forced into this desperate situation. The last few words were that the princess asked the first emperor to send the Qin army from the country to rescue them as soon as possible. The ancestors of Tibet, the tribe is vulnerable to darkness, and only the Qin army can defeat it. At this point in the translation, the old audience member pointed to the signature at the bottom and said, "The following is the most incredible place for me. This princess left her signature here, and she is actually called Princess Wenqing. Princess Wenqing, isn't she from the Tang dynasty?" Fatty still knew this historical common sense. Yes, Princess Wenqing is indeed from the Tang dynasty, and this is the army of the Qin dynasty. It cannot be that she has traveled through time, the old man in the audience agreed. Perhaps, this is the real Princess Wenqing, and the one from the Tang dynasty may be a coincidence, but it is also possible that Li Shimin deliberately created this title to discuss Songtsen Gampo at that time. Sudbai speculated. After all, Li Shimin is the emperor, and he is assisted by people like Li Chunfeng and Yuan Tiangang who can write Tui Beitu. It is not impossible that he knows some secrets about this Qin dynasty period. Yes, little friend, what you said makes sense. Perhaps, it really may be like this, the old man in the audience said excitedly. This is the real Princess Wenqing. Please, why did Princess Wenqing of the Tang dynasty become a fake for no reason? The fat man said, a little confused. Didn't Princess Wenqing of the Tang dynasty fall in love with Songtsen Gampo and establish a 100-year peace between the Tang dynasty and Tubo? Have you made a great contribution to historical peace? The old audience and Sudbai looked at Fatty together, as if they were looking at a fool. Fatty's historical level was really only suitable for reading textbooks and Huanzhuj. Sudbai had to explain, the story of Princess Wencheng and Songtsen Gampo was mostly written by Han historians in the spring and autumn period. Since ancient times, for the Central Plains dynasties, sending princesses to barbarian lands for marriage has been a common practice. It's an extremely humiliating thing. In fact, Songtsen Gampo initially sent an envoy to Chang'an to request Tang Taizong Li Shimin to give him a princess as his wife, but Li Shimin simply looked down on the leader of the barbarian tribe and directly rejected it. Later, Songtsen Gampo led the Tibetan army to fight directly and fought with the Tang army. Li Shimin finally surrendered and selected a girl from the clan to be granted the title of Princess Wencheng and let her go to Tibet to marry Songtsen Gampo. Use it as a marriage proposal, as a gift to a woman, to ensure peace. As for what is written in current history textbooks about how Princess Wencheng became inseparable with Songtsen Gampo after entering Tibet, how Princess Wencheng spread Han culture, how she was loved by Tibetans, and how she established the two ethnic groups. The peace of more than 100 years is the result of the spring and autumn period brushwork. In fact, Songtsen Gampo had 5 wives at that time. After marrying Princess Wencheng, her status was equivalent to that of the youngest wife, and even her title was the lowest. Isn't there a scenic spot in Lhasa called the Jokhang Temple, which is now promoted? It was built by Songtsen Gampo for Princess Wencheng. In fact, it was built for Princess Chaizun, who married from Nepal. That woman was the official wife and princess. It was built for Princess Wencheng. It was originally the Ramaka temple. The peace brought about by the marriage lasted less than 20 years, and then Tubo was completely at war with the Tang dynasty. The two sides fought for nearly 100 years. Tubo not only annexed the achievements of the Tang dynasty in the western regions for decades, and once occupied Chang'an, the capital of the Tang dynasty. Therefore, the theory of peace and friendship was deliberately modified by historians of all dynasties to avoid looking too ugly. Now, Princess Wencheng's greatness and role have been falsely exaggerated and politicized. Why is that? National harmony and national unity are greater than the sky. Sudbai concluded, on this general policy and basis, even the law can be ignored, let alone modifying and blurring the so-called history. The story of Princess Wencheng of the Tang dynasty is actually very similar to the ancient Silk Road. Officials constantly promoted it, and even leaders would shout these slogans to win over domestic ethnic groups and relations with foreign countries. In fact, those with some historical skills and common sense can see these clues. The specific story of Princess Wencheng can be found in history books. There are even Tibetan history books that can be used as evidence. The Silk Road is a theory that was casually named by a German explorer many years ago has now become a myth. This is politics, a bit like the emperor's new clothes. The old man in the audience nodded, which meant that he agreed with Sudbai's statement, and said at the same time, "Now it seems that Li Shimin had no choice but to hold his nose against Tubo, so he had no choice but to make a marriage. And when he gave Princess Wencheng the title, he either happened to be in a car accident, or, it may be that he may really know some secrets about the Qin dynasty, so he gave this title with the intention of deliberately disgusting the Tubo people. Li Shimin may even have a little fantasy, hoping that this Princess Wencheng can hold all the power of the Tibetan tribes in her hands like the one in the Qin dynasty." Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 473. Regardless of whether Princess Wencheng is true or false, and regardless of whether the Princess Wencheng canonized by Li Shimin has a so-called deep meaning, there is really no need to delve into these academic issues now, because the top priority now is still to remove the formation in the carriage. After the method was activated, both the fat man and the young man named Joe said it would take almost 12 hours to complete. Then, at least for the next half day, the 4 of them will be trapped in this narrow space without food or water. Fortunately, Even if it is half a day without food or water, it is nothing to ordinary people. For experienced listeners, this is no longer a problem. The two guys who were obsessed with formations devoted themselves wholeheartedly to exploring and becoming familiar with formations. Thinking about it, after this incident, their understanding and attainment of formations will definitely reach a higher level. This can be regarded as their own opportunities. Subai climbed out of the car window, took out a cigarette from his pocket, and lit one. The air in the narrow space would definitely become more turbid. After a while, another person crawled out from the car window, the old listener. "You didn't tell me if you had cigarettes." "I'm already so hungry," the old man laughed at the audience. Subai handed him a cigarette and threw the lighter over. "Huh." The old man blew out a smoke ring and asked with a satisfied look on his face, "Little friend, what is your name?" "Subai." There is nothing to hide in this point. Although Subai does not like to socialize in the audience circle like Fatty, but since he has been in the audience circle for so long, there must be many people who know his identity. As long as the old audience can go out, he can do whatever he wants. You can ask about Subai's identity by asking about his appearance and enhancements. "Haha, little friend Subai, my surname is Shen and my name is Shen Wen." Subai nodded, but he really had no intention of chatting now. This old man Shen gave people a very sinister feeling, which actually made Subai less likely to catch a cold. "Either you are like a monk and said clearly, 'Don't give me a chance. If I have the chance, I will cheat on you, or I will cheat on you like a fat man. Don't look at me and I will tease you. My father is afraid of you.' On the contrary, these two kinds of people are more comfortable to interact with." Old Shen was somewhere between a monk and a fat man, with a bit of a pedantic feeling. This feeling made Subai the most impatient. "Subai, do you already know something? Can you share it with me?" Old Shen made his intention clear, because whether it was Subai who asked him to summon the souls of the Qin army before or whether Subai was sure that those Qin army soldiers could carry the collapsed rocks, it all showed one meaning. He seemed to have known it for a long time. There are some incredible secrets about the Qin dynasty. It is true that the former one was because Subai had known something about the Qin dynasty for a long time, but the latter one was not that Subai made a plan and then acted. He was just holding back his anger and happened to meet that black man Crow. Si still threatened him and was just tough, but old Shen was not a fat man or a monk. Even if he told him the truth, he probably wouldn't believe that there was a real mental illness among the audience, and the mental illness had become a strength. Powerful senior audience. No comment. Subai looked at the Qin soldiers in front of him while smoking a cigarette, and at the same time reached out to touch them. Chinese people have always valued the dead person. Subai's approach seemed a bit disrespectful, but Subai himself didn't think it was anything. "I can exchange information with you for other things," old Shen said. "It's not rare," Subai refused directly. Regarding the matter of the first emperor, the four of them had agreed not to tell anyone. "This is really like seeing a treasure mountain without being able to enter it. It's really annoying," old Shen said with a bitter smile. Subai reached out and tried to remove the armor from the corpse of a Qin soldier in front of him. This is almost Subai's way of doing things. In every story world in the past, when he saw a dead audience member, Subai would go over and feel around to see if there was anything valuable left. However, when Subai finally took off a breastplate from the corpse of the Qin soldier, the breastplate suddenly became extremely broken, lost all moisture, and seemed to be turned into a pile of scrap metal. Come to think of it, during the last battle, these Qin troops had exhausted everything. Look at the weapons and equipment on the ground. If they were in their heyday, they should have been high-grade magical weapons, but now they have all turned into pieces. "It's iron," old Shen said from the side. "It's better to put him back in clothes. It's freezing cold and without clothes, even a dead person will feel cold." Subai was a little surprised. Could this old man Shen still care about whether these soldiers were cold because he was suffering from Wenking disease at this time? Of course, Subai did have respect for these Qin soldiers. Since these armors were of no use, he might as well put them back on. After putting the breastplate back on the soldier, Subai clapped his hands. There was still more than 10 hours of waiting time. It was really boring. Moreover, it's like being in a sleeper berth on a crowded express train. The height is too low and I can't stand straight, so I can only barely squat. How old are you? Old Shen suddenly asked. Do you have a daughter you want to introduce to me? Subai asked. Haha, how is it possible? People like us are actually punished by God. There is no need to harm others, old Shen said with some regret. Subai took out his mobile phone. Unfortunately, there must be no signal in this place now. Subai simply took out his mobile phone and turned it around in his hands. You weren't invited to Tibet, were you? Old Shen asked. Subai didn't answer. This old man really talked a lot. Old Shen placed his ruler flat on the ground, and the ruler slowly floated on its own. Actually, I'm really afraid of being alone now, or being alone in a narrow space, because it makes me feel suffocated and makes me feel uncomfortable. So, if you are willing to talk to me, if so, I will be very grateful to you. Show me a dead one, Subai teased. Old Shen didn't think so. Looking at your age, are you a college student? Subai nodded. Sometimes, I really envy my previous life. Old Shen showed a look of nostalgia on his face. Although I was always complaining about the injustice of this society, always competing with others, always stepping on others or being beaten. Others stepped on it, but at that time, compared with now, it was like a child playing house. I just thought it was very interesting. Subai didn't listen carefully to the old man's feelings. His eyes were slowly attracted by a crystal in the crevice of the rock in front of him. He slowly got up and walked towards it while squatting. Old Shen was still thinking about himself there, but he didn't notice Subai's movements. That piece of crystal is a pearl, but it is not as round as a pearl. It is a bit like jade, but it is not as clear as jade. If you insist on finding something similar to this, it is the one sold in Yuwu. The beads on souvenir bracelets can generally be purchased in major so-called ancient towns, and the purchase price is extremely cheap. Subai held the bead in his hand and felt nothing, nor did he feel anything strange. Could it be that this was not something that had always been there but the decorations on the clothes of Klaus, Lama, and the dead audience just now? Just when Subai was thinking about this, the fat man's voice came from the carriage, Dabai, come here. Subai put the bead into his pocket and walked towards the carriage while squatting. Old Shen also got up and followed Subai towards the carriage. Subai did not rush into the car through the window. Instead, he lay beside the car window and looked inside. What's wrong? At this time, a lot of chess pieces and flags were placed at the bottom of the carriage by the young man named Joe and the fat man respectively. It was obvious that the two of them were copying and familiarizing themselves with this formation using their own methods and routines. Dabai, I made a discovery, Fatty said. It doesn't take 12 hours, can you teleport right away? Subai asked. It's true that staying in this place for a long time will naturally make you very bored. No, we have been deducing it for almost 2 hours. Although we are still far from being able to activate this formation, we have some understanding and familiarity with this formation. Now, the two of us can unanimously conclude that this formation has never been activated at all. This is a formation that has not been used since it was set up, a virgin formation. The fat man looked at Subai and said seriously. Subai immediately understood what Fatty meant. If this formation had not been activated, it would have been impossible for the princess back then to be teleported out. Then, it was very likely that she would fight to the death here with the 200 Qin soldiers beside her. However, there are only Qin Jun's corpses nearby, not the princess's corpse, and there is not even a woman in sight. Could it be that he was captured, Subai guessed, after all, in ancient times, capturing someone else's general alive, that Zhang Jun was a woman, had a great impact both in terms of results and morale. Appeal. The fat man exhaled a breath and nodded, I think that's probably the case. The princess must have been captured, otherwise, haha. Don't scare yourself, Subai said. It is obvious that the princess was not teleported away, because the last sentence and the signature on the car wall can show the urgency of the situation at that time, and between the lines, you can also feel the belief of fighting to the death. Coupled with the pride of the Qin people and the belief of being a noble, when she wrote these words, she must have thought that she was going to die here. Even if the enemy captured her, they probably only captured her. It was impossible to capture her alive because of the corpse. The light of the ruler appeared, reflecting old Shen's face. He was still studying the words on the wall of the car, feeling a little unable to extricate himself. Damn, old man, can you go smoke and hang out outside the carriage like Dabai to make more space for us who are playing with formations? You keep mumbling your words in the carriage, it really annoys me. No way, Fatty complained. When the fat man said this, he didn't notice that Subai, who was lying on the car window, had an ugly face. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 474. At this time, Subai slowly turned around and found that there was no one behind him. But Subai remembered clearly that at that time, old Shen was walking towards the carriage behind him. The only way to get in and out of the carriage was through the window, which could only allow people to get in one by one. Subai lay on the window. Once inside, it is impossible for a second person to enter. Moreover, the fat man also made it very clear that old Shen had been studying the small seal characters in the carriage and had not left the carriage at all. At that moment, Subai felt a chill down his back. The person who had been smoking and chatting with him for almost an hour turned out to be a fake, but he didn't notice it at all. This is the biggest weirdness. Dabai, what's wrong with you? The fat man seemed to notice that something was wrong with Subai. Subai waved his hand, it's okay, maybe I was suffocated. TCH, it's not because of you and your lunatic insistence on confronting that nigger that we would be trapped here. The fat man was obviously still a little dissatisfied. If it weren't for me, how could you sit here and study this pre-Qin magic circle now? Subai asked. Hee, that's true, Fatty admitted. This could actually be regarded as Zhang Bei's opportunity. The young man surnamed Zhou nodded when he heard this. It was obvious that he had benefited a lot from studying this magic circle, even if he only stayed at a familiar level of copying. Old Shen, on the other hand, unexpectedly extended his ruler to Subai, looked at Subai who was lying on the car window, and asked, really, nothing happened? Subai looked at old Shen. For a moment, Subai suddenly felt the urge to tear the face in front of him into pieces. Old Shen was startled and trembled. He was obviously aware of Subai's murderous intention against him. For a moment, old Shen was a little confused. Why did he provoke this madman? Fortunately, Subai just took a deep breath and said, Fat man, do you still have cigarettes there? Yes, here it is. The fat man threw the cigarette in his pocket to Subai. He was currently studying the magic circle and was concentrating on it. He had no time or interest to smoke. Subai took the cigarette, turned around, squatted forward, and came to a position about 10 meters away from the carriage, and then sat down. A cigarette was taken out and held in his mouth without lighting it. He just chewed the filter subconsciously. Suddenly, Subai seemed to have thought of something, stood up, and began to squat on the ground to search. That cigarette, that cigarette. When that cigarette is finished, there will always be a cigarette butt left. Soon, Subai found a complete cigarette left on the ground, and confirmed that it was the cigarette he had handed to the old man Shen who was chatting with him before. The other party clearly lit a cigarette with a lighter in front of me, took many puffs, blew out smoke rings, and even smelled the smoke. But, was all this a lie? Sudbai pursed his lips. This was no longer an illusion. It was far beyond the so-called illusion level. The other party simply had the ability to play with himself. You have to see whatever she wants you to see. Just like in the Bible, God said, "Let there be light." However, after Sudbai's heart accelerated for more than 10 seconds, he immediately calmed down. He nodded to himself solemnly, took a deep breath, shook the ashes, and whispered to himself. "Road. Actually, you can come out to see me in your true form, my princess. If you are really lonely, I can chat with you to relieve your fatigue," Sudbai said calmly. Then, next moment, Sudbai still had a cigarette in his hand and had no time to move. Then an invisible force directly pressed over and hit Sudbai hard on the chest, knocking Sudbai to the ground. Sudbai felt as if his mouth was filled with air and he couldn't make a sound. His hands and feet seemed to be imprisoned at this time, and he couldn't even move. This is like a ghost on the bed. In fact, Sudbai could still switch to other states to fight back, at least give it a try, but Sudbai didn't do that. He was really afraid of completely angering the lingering princess. Moreover, Sudbai himself knew that in the eyes of the other party, his bloodline was an enemy from the west, and his zombie bloodline was also an unknown and disgusting existence in the eyes of the Easterners. No matter which bloodline Sudbai switched to, he would definitely be directly angered. Other side. The strength in his chest did not lessen or weaken. Sudbai blinked. It seemed that this princess didn't want to kill herself. Or, she couldn't kill herself. She is dead. She died in battle more than 2,000 years ago. It is impossible for her to still have the strength she had during her lifetime. The reason why the other party was able to suppress her should be related to the surrounding environment. It even has something to do with the thoughts and ideas in your own mind. I feel that she is very strong, and I already have feelings of awe for her in my heart, so the other party can suppress me. I can't move, but I haven't suffered any damage, right? The fat man in the car wiped his sweat, and then seemed to hear something. He turned his head and looked out the window, and found that Sudbai was still sitting there, smoking leisurely. Hey, he's quite comfortable. Immediately, the fat man lowered his head and continued to copy the formation. However, in fact, at that end, Sudbai was pressed to the ground, with his hands and feet spread out, and the cigarette had been thrown away long ago. Desecrating military ranks is a capital crime. The cold voice echoed in Sudbai's ears. Sudbai thought in his mind that it was his previous action of taking off the Qin soldiers' armor from the bodies of the Qin soldiers that made the lingering princess angry. These soldiers were the Qin soldiers who followed her into Tibet more than 2,000 years ago. At first, she was able to conquer the Tibetan ancestor tribes with these 200 Qin soldiers plus the talisman of Zilong. In the end, these 200s of soldiers died in the battle with her. She cares about them, which is a matter of course, but Sudbai just took the armor from their corpses and ruined the remains of the martyrs. How could this princess endure it? Originally, according to Sudbai's usual temper, if someone suppressed him like this, he would still go on even if he knew he was defeated. What's more, this princess was actually just a lingering ghost, leaving at most a mark on her soul. There were 4 senior audience members. The fat man and the young man named Joe were good at formations. The fat man and the old man Shen were obviously specialized in suppressing the strengthening of ghosts. They were more than enough to deal with a lonely ghost. This princess couldn't make any big waves, otherwise she wouldn't have been absent from the beginning and had to wait until Sudbai came out alone just now to appear mysteriously. However, Sudbai actually admitted that the action of peeling off the armor from the Qin soldier just now was indeed a bit inauthentic. Although Sudbai later put the armor back on the opponent, this was based on the premise that the armor had turned into scrap metal. Otherwise, Sudbai would definitely have done more, and the Qin soldiers here would probably have run away. Fatty is obsessed with formations now, and he will probably come and grab some equipment after finishing the formations before leaving. It's just that what he did was not authentic, and it was not a situation where he couldn't live without the opponent's armor. The princess was angry, and Subai recognized it. If she wanted to lose her temper, Subai should let her do it first. Men, what's wrong with letting a woman lose her temper on him? It's not shameful, is it? What's more, this is the princess of Daqin. However, soon, Subai found that his body had regained consciousness, and the other party's power seemed to have retreated. Subai sat up again. The cigarette at his feet was only half burned. Subai picked it up and took another puff. Just now, it was like having a dream. But Subai knew clearly that this was definitely not a dream. The princess of Qin might still be looking at him in a narrow corner. Smoking less is not good for your health, and the space here is so small. If there are too many cigarettes, the air will become more depressing. Old Shen's voice came from behind, and Subai turned his head and looked at Old Shen. Haha, are you real or fake? Huh? What does this mean? Old Shen seemed a little confused. Subai bent down and stood up. He did not go to the carriage to see if there was an old man Shen who was studying small seal characters inside. Instead, he stared at Old Shen coldly. I thought you were quite hypocritical before, but now I suddenly feel that you are more hypocritical than I thought. What do you mean? Old Shen had a look of confusion on his face. Stop pretending. Why didn't she transform into the image of the fat man and the Taiwanese, instead of your image? Subai rubbed his two fingers and put out the cigarette butt. Was the soul of the princess of Daqin captured by you? The ruler in your hand was suppressed? You suppressed it secretly and wanted to take it away as a trophy. I have no objection. I am not a moral freak, and I am not opposed to doing so. But you either do things quickly and neatly and don't drag your feet, or you just don't do it at all. You suppressed her ghost, but now you can't suppress her. Do you want to kill us all? Subai scolded Old Shen with a questioning tone. This old man is an old yin. Before, he pretended to kowtow to the corpses of these Qin soldiers to show respect, but maybe from the beginning when he shook the soul-chasing bell, he had already discovered the soul of the princess of Daqin wandering nearby and sent her to the dead body. He secretly collected the ruler and suppressed it? That simple Wan was really pitiful. He kowtowed to show respect to the Qin army along with this old yin bi. Oh, I thought you were a mentally disturbed listener, but I didn't expect that you could see through this matter. Old Shen reached out and patted his ruler gently, saying disapprovingly, she is just resisting. That's all, but she can only tinker with some little tricks. No matter how great and powerful she was during her lifetime, she is just a broken soul that has experienced more than 2,000 years of wind and rain. If you really exerted your strength just now, even her tricks can't suppress you, it's just because you don't want to. Old Shen paused and looked at Subai with amusement. You said I want to kill everyone? Just because of her. At this moment. Click. A crisp sound came alternately. Cracks began to appear on the bodies of the 200 Qin soldiers. Their bodies, which were as tall as poplars, began to shake, as if they had turned into rotten wood that was about to break. And the rock above the head, which was originally stuck, began to slide down again. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 475. Perhaps, Subai and Old Shen look at things differently. In Old Shen's view, a soul that has been suppressed by himself with a ruler, even if she is still making noises and resisting, it is still nothing. If she makes a fuss, she will not have the energy to make a fuss. In this regard, No matter it doesn't matter whether the dead soul of a princess or an ordinary innocent soul is the same. In essence, in old Shen's opinion, they are the same truth. Therefore, old Shen looked at the commotion and chaos of the Daqin princess indifferently. Didn't you see that? She would also find listeners like you, Subai, who are not good at ghosts and gods to harass her. Others, she dared to go touch it? In fact, you, a mentally disturbed person, are still clinging to her ridiculous identity at this time and are unwilling to use your true strength to resist her. However, in Subai's view, after being suppressed by the ruler, when the princess struggled to resist the power from old Shen, she still wanted to punish Subai for taking off the armor of the fallen Qin soldiers, exuding an unconventional aura. How sure is she that in this environment and situation, she can still vow to punish Subai? Sure enough, everything confirmed Subai's feeling. When these originally strong Qin soldiers began to become brittle, the rock layer above them that was originally supported finally began to slide downward again. Old Shen suddenly changed his color at this moment. He immediately held a ruler in one hand and shouted angrily, "Hey, you little bitch, how dare you!" Subai couldn't help but cover his forehead at this time. This old man Shen has already entered the devil's disease. He is too obsessed with his past thoughts and experiences. Perhaps, he has conquered many ghosts with noble status during his lifetime, but, this time is really different. After the death of the first emperor, history was cut off. No one or anything before that could be viewed and analyzed according to the thinking habits of the next 2000 years or even completely according to the thinking habits on the radio. Even the formations, the pre-Qin formations and the formations of later generations, are all very different, otherwise the two formation masters Fatty and the young man surnamed Joe would not have spent so long just copying and getting familiar with them. The reason why Subai didn't resist when the princess attacked him before was because Subai knew that if the other party really wanted to punish him, he could have attacked him when old Shen used the bell to summon the souls of the Qin army to return. Because of this move, it can be regarded as disturbing the rest of the dead, but the other party did not. The other party could have made an attack when he reached out to take off Qin Bing's armor, but the other party did not. He just said something very literary, they would be cold if they had no clothes on. Therefore, when the other party suddenly made a serious accusation against him and declared that he was guilty, Subai felt a sense of peace in his heart. It was not only because of Subai's awe of the other party's princess status, but also because of Subai's fear of being a princess. So, sensual. This is actually a routine, a method used by a superior, first giving you a big stick, and then holding it high and letting it go. In fact, she still wants something from you. This is the thinking mode of a superior. She needs you to be grateful to her and serve her. After all, Subai used to be the owner of a large consortium. Subai has not only seen many of these habits and methods, but has also used them many times. Subai was actually still waiting to find out what the princess wanted him and others to do for her. This was actually a bit like triggering hidden tasks in the story world, and hidden tasks were often accompanied by many opportunities and gains. However, it is obvious that based on the current situation, old Shen has completely pissed off the princess. This is a generation of Qin people who were born with Zilong and then swept across Liu He. Their purpose is: the 6 countries are blocking us, destroy the 6 countries. The mountains are blocking us, so we need to open a mountain road. The river blocks us and divides the canal. Did you hear anything? The young man surnamed Joe put down a small flag and asked with some confusion. He was sitting in the innermost part of the carriage, far away from the only entrance and exit, which was the window. The fat man was still immersed in the study of battle tactics. After listening to the other party's words, he raised his head with some doubts. Then he looked out the car window and found that old Shen and Subai were sitting there peacefully outside, smoking and talking and laughing. Let's smash it? He smacked his lips and smiled. Two stinky men are spanking. The fat man pointed at the formation texture below. You can double check here. I will organize this piece. We will try our best to divide and simplify it into familiar and commonly used formations. Law. Well, okay. The young man named Joe lowered his head and continued to immerse himself in the mystery of the formation with Fatty. In fact, the real situation outside is that as the corpses of the Qin soldiers around the carriage become brittle, the rocks above their heads have slipped some distance away from before, and they are only about 20 centimeters away from crushing the carriage. By then, the fat man and the young man named Joe in the carriage might not even have time to react. Subai was now half crouching. He opened his hands and looked around. Stop, stop, I will help you kill this old guy, and then I will do what you tell me to do. You stop first. Click. The Qin soldiers stood up again, and the downward trend of the huge rock layer above was stopped. Old Shen cursed angrily at his ruler while staring at Subai from the corner of his eye. Subai took a deep breath, turned around, and pointed at the carriage. There are two friends of mine in the carriage. If they knew that this old guy almost caused them to be crushed into pieces, they would definitely hate him to death. So, remove your blindfold and let me call out those two friends. With their help, we can kill this old thing easily. It would be difficult for me alone. Subai said sincerely. However, this time, there seemed to be no reaction from the other side. Obviously, even after 2,000 years of passing away, the dead princess is still not really stupid. Bitch woman, despicable woman, how dare you resist me, how dare you cheat on me? Old Shen immediately screamed more exaggeratedly than before, and then he spit out a mouthful of blood from the tip of his tongue and sprayed it on the ruler. A yellow brilliance immediately bloomed on the ruler, and he began to sacrifice the princess. Let go. Subai squatted half-crouched, stamped one foot on the ground, and was ejected. He rushed directly in front of Old Shen, grabbed Old Shen's ruler with one hand, and tried to grab Old Shen's neck with the other hand. However, Old Shen was no soft-footed shrimp either. His ruler immediately released a barrier to separate him from Subai. The two people were in a stalemate. Because of the small space, Subai could not fully display his close combat ability. This also gave Old Shen the possibility and opportunity to face Subai up close alone. Buzz. A crisp sound came. The carriage suddenly shook. The fat man and the young man named Joe, who were concentrating on copying and studying the formation in the carriage, staggered. The fat man immediately looked out the window. This time, he finally saw Subai instead of Subai smoking. The scene of a stalemate with Old Shen. The fat man immediately got out of the car window, and the young man surnamed Joe also got out. As soon as the two of them got out, they could clearly feel that the height outside the car was much lower than before. Before, they just couldn't straighten their heads a little, but now they have to bow their heads. Bent up. Fat man, this old thing secretly suppressed the dead soul of Princess Daqin, almost causing us to be crushed to death. The dead soul of Princess Daqin can control whether the corpses of these Qin soldiers can continue to resist the rock formations above our heads. Our lives are in the hands of the princess. Subai shouted while struggling to maintain a stalemate with Old Shen. The fat man and the young man named Joe looked at each other, and both of them could see the shock and fear in each other's eyes. Damn, I was almost crushed into a pulp in my happy state, the fat man roared at Old Man Shen, and a crimson flying sword flew out from his back. Old man, you bastard, you almost tricked us to death. Fatty, I'll kill you first. The natal flying sword flew up and rushed towards Old Shen. Get rid of this old guy first. 2 handfuls of sand appeared in the palm of the young man named Joe, and the sand floated away, like dandelions rising in the wind. Hey, you want to kill me together? Old Shen's chest heaved and blood surged, and grimaces appeared on his face. Then I, at least, have to use a backing. After finishing speaking, waves of sinister wind emanated from Old Shen's body, and then, a wisp of black mist with a huge corrupting aura spurted out from it, but this black mist was not directed towards Subai, who was right in front of him. Instead, he rushed directly to the ruler. The originally yellow ruler suddenly turned black at this moment, and a female scream came from the ruler. Immediately afterwards, Fatty's red natal flying sword was directly nailed to the ruler, pressing it to the ground. The formation formed by the sand immediately condensed out, and the power of the seals was superimposed, all facing the ruler. Inside the ruler, the woman's roars and roars could be heard endlessly. Even at this time, the ruler was still trembling, as if it was still possible to break free. Sudbai's body began to wither, and a dirty and evil aura came out. At this time, Sudbai switched out of the zombie state, evil energy bursting out from his body, and he stepped on the ruler. Boom! Finally, the ruler became quiet, which also meant that the soul of the dead man inside was completely sealed. Old Shen knelt on the ground with a pale face. He was obviously seriously injured. Fatty and the young man named Joe also let out a long sigh of relief. Sudbai bent down and picked up the ruler. "Mr. Shen, before you go out, put this thing here first and let the evil energy from my body continue to suppress her, otherwise it's not safe." Old Shen nodded and agreed, even if it was his natural weapon. Sudbai stretched out his hand, gently touched the ruler with his sharp zombie nails, and said softly, "There is only one person who can completely control our life and death, and that is the radio. And you, my princess, you should rest." If the princess hadn't shown the ability to make Qin Bing's corpse brittle, Sudbai would have really snatched her away from old Shen to see what the princess of Qin had ordered, but she revealed that she would let the people hear the ability of 4 senior listeners to be crushed to death by a group was to touch the reverse scales of the listeners. In front of an audience, moral integrity is really worthless. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 476. In the carriage, the fat man and the young man surnamed Joe sped up the copying of the formation. Both of them also put aside their previous selfishness of wanting to go deeper and explore the front line, and began to focus wholeheartedly on stimulating the formation as soon as possible and roughly figuring out the direction of transmission. Effort. Studying the pre-Qin formations, for formation masters, the sense of happiness is overwhelming, but here, the rock layer above may press down at any time, which is equivalent to a dog-headed guillotine floating above your head, shaking. At any time it may be the same as falling down, and the incident of the dead princess also made them wake up from the initial excitement. No matter what, let's leave this dangerous place as soon as possible. Sudbai was sitting against the outer wall of the carriage, and old Shen was sitting cross-legged in meditation in front of Sudbai. No one accuses old Shen of secretly suppressing the soul of the princess, because it is meaningless to argue and condemn this at this time. Moreover, stealing food is the basic code of conduct for the audience. Everyone relies on chance to obtain benefits and opportunities, which is also the proper meaning in the title. Just like when Sudbai complained about Klaus and everyone was trapped here, the young man surnamed Joe and the old man Shen did not chatter about Sudbai's move. In the face of the fait accompli, useless arguments are the most meaningless. One thing, everyone knows this in their hearts. After all, they are all senior listeners. If they were experiencers or low-level listeners, they might still have internal strife or quarrels at this time. Old Shen's ruler was held in Sudbai's hand. The soul of the deceased princess was inside. But now, through the ruler, Fatty's runes, and the formation of the young man surnamed Joe, and finally Sudbai's zombie evil aura, the spirit of this princess was removed. All contact between the princess and the outside world was completely strangled. There was nothing she could do about it. She was able to control the corpses of these Qin soldiers, which was equivalent to controlling the life and death of the 4 audience members present. This was an unacceptable situation. Sudbai was also very curious in his heart, what kind of orders did the princess come to find him? Fortunately, although Sudbai was indirectly mentally ill, she was not born with a brain defect after all. At this time, he also knew that the princess was waiting for everyone to leave here. Before, it was safest to be obediently sealed in the ruler. Let's talk about everything after we get out. Subai remembered Frankenstein's assistant. That guy had not contacted Subai for a long time. On the one hand, it was because Subai had been running around recently and had no energy to take care of it. On the other hand, the research done by that person was very difficult. Without disturbing the rest of the audience, Subai turned a blind eye. However, if the soul of the princess could be taken out this time, it would be easier to interrogate some useful information in that guy's laboratory. Sighing, it's a pity that the monk and Gyatso are still in a vegetative state. Otherwise, with these two guys here, it would be a simple matter to pry open the mouth of a dead soul, even if she is a princess. He lit another cigarette and held it between his fingertips. Old Shen also slowly opened his eyes. He now looked much more haggard. After you go out, go back and take good care of your body. The radio will be off the air for 3 months. Don't get upset before it resumes, Subai joked. Thank you for reminding me. Old Shen thanked him without looking unhappy at all. But his posture and appearance made Subai feel even more uncomfortable. In terms of the art of hiding oneself and yin people, with the monk as a template, when Subai looked at others now, no matter how he looked at them, he felt that they were imitating others. Just like that, I squinted my eyes, sometimes dozed off, sometimes opened my eyes again and said a few words, and time passed by little by little. Subai didn't wake up again until the sound of the fat man clapping his hands came from the carriage. Dabai, get in the car. It's done. You should be able to teleport, Fatty shouted. Subai stood up and got into the carriage through the window. Old Shen also got in afterwards. It doesn't matter if this formation teleports 4 people at the same time. The fat man rubbed his hands and signaled to the young man named Joe. The young man named Joe nodded and made a hand seal. Immediately, the magic circle on the ground began to emit an ink-colored light. This is the energy tank, which is used to instill the entire formation. Originally, I thought it could be replaced by blood essence. Now it seems that it is actually much simpler. There is actually a formation within the formation that absorbs the surrounding energy. When the magic is activated, none of the 4 of us should hide our secrets and take the initiative to let our power be sucked into the golden formation. I have calculated that it will not have a big impact on us. The fat man looked at Old Shen's face and said. Obviously, this was a warning. Old Shen was currently the worst and most seriously injured among the 4. This also reminded him not to hide anything later. I know what's appropriate. Let's get out alive first. Old Shen looked at the ruler in Subai's hand. Can you give me my natural weapon now? I'll give it to you when I get out. Even for a second in this underground, I don't dare to be rash. You know, the real owner of this carriage, but the one who is now sealed here, if she does whatever she does, the formation in the carriage may be destroyed immediately, and we cannot give her the slightest chance. The radio has to be off the air for 3 months, without food or water for 3 months. Even we listeners can't bear it. Let's talk about it after we get out. The young man named Joe also agreed with Subai at this time. Indeed, at this time, the most important thing is to ensure that you leave safely. As for the ruler, it is not your own anyway, so it doesn't matter. The fat man glared at Old Shen fiercely. Are you still afraid that he will swallow your broken ruler? Old Shen's eyes wandered for a moment, but he finally nodded. In fact, Subai could see that there was a flash of sternness in the other party's eyes, and the aura on his body suddenly lifted and then dropped. Obviously, Old Shen had just planned to kill everything, such as destroying the law. Array. However, he gave up because he did not believe that the 3 people here would not expect him to do such a thing. Of course, the most important point is that the best result for him is to destroy the magic circle and be killed by the 3 people here. Kill individuals first. Not everyone in the audience is Subai, otherwise the monk would not have said that he should try not to do tasks with Subai unless it is really necessary. The fat man and the young man named Joe activated the magic circle together. The light of the magic circle was several times stronger than before. At the same time, Subai felt that the magic circle was pulling his power. Subai did not resist and let part of his power flow into the formation. Among none of the four people blocked or resisted. As power continued to be injected into the formation, the carriage began to tremble. This was the first time that Subai experienced space teleportation other than the white light transmission of the radio. This feeling was better than the white light transmission of the radio. The teleportation was much more bumpy, and now his whole body began to sway, sometimes feeling cold and sometimes hot. This is enough to show how advanced the broadcast transmission is. You don't feel any discomfort at all, and you can even enter the story world in your sleep. Just when the formation was about to start transmitting, the young man named Joe suddenly opened his eyes. A purple stream of light flashed in his pupils, and a purple dividing line immediately appeared under Old Shen's feet. Old Shen immediately realized something and started roaring and roaring, but the purple dividing line was like a chasm, intercepting it. Immediately afterwards, the young man surnamed Joe looked at Subai, and a purple dividing line appeared at Subai's feet. Subai immediately felt as if he had been thrown off a high-speed train, and the strong feeling of weightlessness kept stimulating him. Subai, although his feet were still standing on the same spot, it seemed as if he was falling into the abyss. At this time, a normal person's reaction would be to return to the formation to prevent this terrible feeling of weightlessness, but the purple line seems to be right under his feet, but it is very far away from him. At this time, the fat man's natal flying sword immediately pierced his back, and his whole aura suddenly increased. He saw the fat man making seals with his hands, and when he raised his arms, the purple lines at Subai's feet disappeared immediately and wrapped around the fat man's hands. During this time, Subai's whole body suddenly changed from the feeling of the elevator accelerating downwards to the feeling of the elevator accelerating ascent. In just an instant, the feeling of weightlessness disappeared. The face of the young man named Joe suddenly changed, and he looked at the fat man in disbelief. However, the fat man did not give the young man surnamed Joe time and opportunity to react. He pressed down his hands and aimed at the young man surnamed Joe's feet. The purple lines appeared under the young man surnamed Joe's feet. Immediately, the young man surnamed Joe began to shout in fear, but his voice was blocked by the purple lines, and his steps and all his claws were also blocked. The next moment, the light of the magic circle was stimulated to the extreme. Subai only felt that his vision was blurred and his mind was dizzy. After about 10 seconds, Subai recovered his vision and found that he was standing under a mound. Above his head, there were stars, and the air suddenly became extremely fresh. At Subai's feet, the fat man squatted there, with blood pouring from his eyes, ears, mouth, and nose, looking very miserable. The fat man raised his head with difficulty and opened his mouth. His teeth were full of blood, but he still managed to speak. "That guy, I secretly, discussed, to throw you and the old man, down there, in the future, when you are trapped, there, then, come back to find, the engineering team from the side. Dig into the cracks in the ground, take your magic weapons, you died of hunger and thirst, not killed by others, not affected by cause and effect." Subai squatted down and reached out to support the fat man. The fat man grinned and gasped. "Don't rush to be moved, I can't die. When you return to Shanghai, say something nice for me in front of Monk Gyatso, you speak, they will listen." Subai smiled and said, "That Wan is such an innocent person. Fatty, in fact, you were the one who encouraged him first."